All right. Actually, Mr. Lewin, why don't you come? I want to address an issue with you and Mr. DeGuerin.
Okay.
All right, the jurors and alternates are present. The people versus Robert Durst. Mr. Durst is here, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chesnoff. We've got Mr. Lewin and Mr. Milius, Henderson, Miata. The witness, Doug Oliver, has resumed the witness stand. And I'll remind you that you are under oath. Mr. Lewin, you may continue with your examination of the witness.
Mr. Oliver, at the end of the last clip, you said that you would be in England and in essence said that we would have to find you. Why did you say that?
I don't recall why I said that.
You just heard yourself say it though, correct?
Yes?
So you're saying that you don't recall saying it, and after listening to it, you don't know why you said it?
No, I don't recall why I said it, to be honest with you.
Did you say it because
Keep
you
your voice
were...
up, please, so that the jurors
Did
can
you
hear.
say it, Mr. Oliver, because you were trying to be extremely rude?
No, I was not, I did not want to come and testify.
Okay. Do you recall that you were asked during, again, the February 29, 2016 interview, that you were specifically asked about your 2001 comment that Kathy might have been sold into white slavery? Do you recall being asked about that during this phone conversation back from February 29, 2016?
I don't recall discussing, what is it, the white slavery you call it?
Clip D0010, 22916, page 5, line 18, to page 13, line 9.
This is 103.
Yes, and we're getting, at least for a while, Your Honor, we're getting near the end of this current batch of clips.
103 and 103A. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Our let's see. Is there a visual here or just sound?
There should be visual.
Okay, so we don't have that.
With the court's permission?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Oliver, I know what you said before. I don't know why we can't just...
What are you talking about what I said before?
Let me tell you what you said before. You were interviewed by detectives from New York State Police and Westchester County DA's office on...
I was never in the Westchester DA.
No, listen to me. By an investigator from the Westchester County DA's office. They were together.
Let's get this straight. Let's get the facts straight.
So you were interviewed by these guys on December 19th.
Purported to be interviewed. Go ahead.
Are you denying that you were interviewed by them?
So you told us last time you spoke with Joey Becerra.
Do you remember talking to Joey Becerra?
No.
Okay, well, so here is what.
Who is she?
No, Joey's actually a guy. He is a New York State police detective. And what you ended up saying at the time is that, among other things, you said that at the time that Kathy disappeared, you thought that she, quote, might have been sold into white slavery because of her cocaine problem. So do you recall saying that?
No.
So then that would not reflect your views then. So if that's written down, is your memory, are you saying I didn't say it, or are you saying I just don't remember saying it?
I don't think I said that, but whatever.
Well, so what I want to talk to you about is Kathy's,
Sure.
is Kathy's,
Sure, the white slavery.
what,
Is that a fact? Did they should do that?
are you saying are people sold into white slavery? Listen, it was your,
No, was Kathy, is that what you think happened to her?
geez, I'm really not, it's not my position to be divulging what we think, but I'm going to do this one thing for you. No, I'm going to do this one thing for you. I will tell you, no, we do not think she was sold into white slavery.
Neither do I, okay.
Okay, so what we want to talk to you about is basically your relationship with Bob Durst, what was going on when Kathy disappeared, and what, if anything, he might have told you.
Well, I don't know if I can recall any of that.
Well, that's why you were able to recall it in 2001 when you were interviewed.
How long ago was that?
December 19, 2001.
And how many years? 15 years? Are you kidding?
Well, you remembered what had happened. It had been 16 years since, 19 years since the incident, and you remembered. So, so you asked me what I wanted to talk to you about. So I just laid out the areas that I want to speak to you about. It is up to you if you want to talk to us. So I'm just listen, this is going to be my last call. If you don't want to talk to us, just tell us. And then what I'll do is I'll just go through the subpoenas. And I don't like to do it because it's inconvenient for the witnesses.
I
But
don't want to be threatened, but
I'm not threatening you at all. I'm simply telling you what the process is.
how long does that take you?
To do these subpoenas?
No, before you think that I would have to come to California.
Well, what would happen is that you would end up coming for a preliminary hearing. And I don't know what that date is going to be yet.
And the fact that I'm fearful of getting on commercial flights, what do you do with that?
You'll have to explain that to the judge in New York
Yeah.
and see if you can get the county of, whatever county you appear in to pay for your private flight.
I'm telling you right now, you guys are never going to get on commercial
Well,
flights.
then,
Guaranteed on my body,
Train.
you'll never get me on a
Well,
flight.
well, then-
You're going to have to put me in jail in New York.
well, Miss Robin, let me ask you this.
Now, you would do that, be my guest, okay? I don't like being threatened by you.
Well, I'm not threatening you at all, Mr. Oliver. I'm telling you
You're
how.
threatening me with something I don't want to do, okay? I'm not threatening you. And you know, this is probably why LA loses all their cases. You guys you're not very bright, obviously.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Oliver. I'm going to take that you don't want to talk to us, and I'll tell you
No,
what.
I didn't say
Well,
anything.
so here's the situation. I'm going to lay out the last thing.
No, don't want to have to.
No, listen to me. You go ahead. You want to hang up your phone. Listen, you want to hang up your
I
phone.
can't hear you.
Well,
Your English is not good for me.
my English is not that good. Okay, so here's the
No, you're
situation.
not being very clear to me. You see, when your voice gets upset, you are unintelligent.
That's interesting. Okay, so here's the deal.
Hey, what's the deal?
We have some questions.
You're making a deal.
We have some questions we'd like to ask you. If you're not willing to do these questions right now, you can tell me no. That's fine.
You're on my phone. I don't know who you even are.
Oh, are we gonna, Mr. Oliver? Are we gonna play this game? You want to answer the questions or not? If you don't, I'm gonna drag your ass into court in New York. That's what I'm gonna do.
Is that what you're doing? I wasn't disrespectful to you.
You weren't really.
Why would you use foul language to me?
You weren't disrespectful to me. You called me. I believe you said dumb. You told me I was unintelligible.
You are. When you get upset, you are very unintelligent. Then you
Hey,
learn.
Mr. Oliver, I'm not upset at all. This is, believe it or not, this is probably the funniest thing that's happened.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
It's only Monday, but it's.
Obviously, you're enjoying it. Okay, so you like to waste your time.
Well, here's my question. Do you want to talk now, or do you want me to pursue the options that I have? It's a yes
I
or
don't
a no.
know whether I want to talk now.
Well, then I'll start by going, I want to ask you about how did you meet Bob Durst?
I don't know who you are. What identification did I know who you are?
We've been going about what identification. I've given you my numbers.
Send me your identification.
Sit to where? Where would you like my identification
You
set?
can text it to me.
Okay, on this one, you want...
Mr. Oliver, would it be easier if I came in person and interviewed you?
Sure. If you feel like coming in person, where are you?
So I would bring the New York State Police with me, and then we would.
I'm gonna be in London. I'm gonna be in London, sir.
Okay, you're gonna be in London for when, the rest of your life, or?
No, but I'm leaving shortly. I was in London last week. I probably won't be back for a couple weeks.
So here's what,
Are you taking you to find coach?
Excuse me?
Here's the thing, Mr. Oliver. Right? You're in business, right? You're in real estate.
Supposedly.
Okay. And when you are expecting someone for an answer under the decision, is it frustrating when you feel like you've been turned around?
What decision are you looking for?
Okay, what we're looking for right now is, do you want to talk, yes or no?
And I don't think so.
oh, great, we made some progress. Okay, hey, listen, we'll see you in court, Mr. Oliver. Have a nice day.
Mr. Oliver, would you characterize your attitude and demeanor on that call as cooperative?
I didn't want to come out to testify.
I'm going to ask the question again. Would you characterize your demeanor on that call as cooperative?
As cooperative? I just didn't want to come out here.
I'm going to try a third time. It's a yes or no question. Please listen carefully. Would you characterize your demeanor on that call as cooperative?
No, I was not cooperating.
So, after that call, do you agree that we left you alone and did not attempt to speak with you?
I don't recall whether you left me alone. It feels like you've been, bullying me for years.
Okay.
And you just did it over here between the break.
So again, Mr. Oliver, listen to my question. Did we attempt to call you or to have any further communication with you until you came to court?
From which date?
From the date that we just discussed, which was, let me give you the exact date, Mr. Oliver, 2/29/16. Did we have any contact with you at all?
I don't recall when the last time we had contact.
You agree, though, Mr. Oliver, that you did continue to have contact with Mr. Durst's attorneys?
Yes, I've spoken to the Durst attorneys.
And in fact, you were having contact with Mr. Durst's attorneys.
So will you repeat that answer? Say it out
Yes.
loud.
You were having contact with Mr. Durst's attorneys all along, correct?
All along, what time frame?
So, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Durst was arrested in March of 2015. From March of 2015 until 2019, did you have repeated contacts with Mr. Durst's attorneys and or his investigators?
I believe so, yes.
I can't hear you.
And the best of my knowledge, I had some contact with them.
Approximately how many contacts do you think you had?
I can't recall.
Fair to say that you were substantially more cooperative with them than you were with us?
No, I believe I was cooperating with both of you the same way.
Did you ask Mr. Durst's attorneys to fly you out, pay for gas on your private plane?
They never asked me to come out to meet them.
Did
They came to New York.
you call Mr. Durst's attorneys dumb, unintelligible, or tell them that's why they lose all the cases?
I don't recall saying that to them.
So, you had a jail visit with Mr. Durst on April 22nd, 2017. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you also accepted jail calls from Mr. Durst on October 16, 2017, correct?
I accepted, I'm not sure of the dates, but I did accept calls from them.
Does May 3rd, 2018 sound like another jail call you would have accepted?
There were several calls, I don't know the exact dates.
March 20th, 2019? Does that sound about right?
Is that a question?
Yes.
I want to interrupt, but at some point there's something that's been addressed that I need to address with the court.
Okay, I won't forget.
Sorry?
Is that, you need to address it immediately?
No, you're noting it at the point in time in the record, so I don't have to take away from jury time. I'm happy to talk to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chestnut.
Did you have a jail visit with Mr. Durst on October 26, 2019?
Yes.
And isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that on your own, you came to court in front of Judge Wyndham at the airport on October 28, 2019? Is that correct?
Yes.
And that was at the invitation and with the knowledge of Mr. Durst, correct?
Yes,
He told you he was going to be in court and asked you if you would come, is that right?
yes,
During that time, did we attempt to put you on call as a witness for the trial?
yes,
And were you cooperative with that request?
yes,
Mr. Oliver, you understand that Judge Wyndham, who's sitting right there, was in court on the same day that we're referring to. I'm going to ask you that question again. Were you cooperative with that request?
yes.
So you don't recall, Mr. Oliver, refusing to give your phone number to Detective Shamlian and having to have Judge Wyndham order you to be in court. You don't recall that?
I recall him ordering me to be in court.
So you were ordered to be in court, and isn't it true then that shortly after that, you got an attorney, and that attorney asked that you be allowed to be placed on call? Is that correct?
Yes,
At that time, isn't it correct that I asked if you would be willing to sit down for an interview? Is that correct?
I don't recall you asking that.
I can't
I
understand.
don't recall you asking me to sit down.
No, through your attorney, Mr. Oliver,
Through
your
my
attorney came, listen to me, your attorney came to you and informed you that I wanted to interview you and gave you the opportunity, the option to do an interview with me. Is that correct?
When?
October of 2019.
Which attorney?
Stephanie Yanakura? Is that your attorney?
If she came and asked me to meet with you, I would have met with you.
You met with me on October 30th, 2019, correct? By phone. We had an interview, correct?
If that's the date, I believe so, yes.
You need to speak up. You're mumbling, Mr. Oliver. No one can hear you.
It was difficult with this masculine place.
Well, try to enunciate if you can. Right now, you're being unintelligible.
I'm sorry.
That's better.
All right, Mr. Oliver, you had a phone interview with myself, Mr. Balian, is that correct? And a district attorney investigator, or it might have been Detective Shamlian, on October 30th, 2019. Is that correct? I'm sorry, October 30th, 2019. Do you recall that?
I recall having a call with you, yes.
Now, I want to go back and I want to ask you some questions specifically. If I were to ask you, how would you describe Bob Durst in terms of how he is with his money?
Could you explain to me what do you mean, what he's with his money?
Sure. Is it fair to say that Bob Durst is somebody who tends to be pretty cheap with his money?
No.
Do you recall saying, in fact, that unlike you, who likes to spend money on art and cars, Bob Durst is very conservative and frugal with his money? Do you recall saying that?
If I may have said that. I don't recall it, but if that's what I said, can you show me a transcript or something you're referring to?
So, Mr. Oliver, it's going to be easier if I do this. Do you agree? Do you agree, Mr. Oliver, that your friend Bob Durst is somebody who traditionally is tight with his money?
I wouldn't say he's tight. I would say he was conservative.
Okay. And did you also say that you were unaware of Bob Durst giving away money to his friends?
I don't recall him giving money away to his friends.
Did you say during that interview that you were not aware that Bob Durst had ever given Susan Berman money?
I don't recall what I said during the interview.
Were you aware prior to that interview on October 30th, 2019, that Bob Durst had given Susan Berman money?
Well, I believe that you told me that in one of our conversations that he lent her money.
So listen to my question again.
Okay.
Were you aware before the interview on October 30th, 2019, that Bob Durst had given Susan Berman money? Were you aware of that?
I was aware of that he supposedly gave money to her.
And how did you become aware?
Okay, so it's got to be much louder. The witness just said he was aware that he supposedly gave money to her. So, but you need to talk loud.
I'm sorry.
How was it, Mr. Oliver, that you became aware that Bob Durst had given money to Susan Berman?
I believe I read it in the newspaper clippings, or maybe in the movies, or from you. I'm not sure where I got the information.
You would agree, Mr. Oliver, that the fact that Bob Durst had given Susan Berman $50,000, that surprised you. Is that correct?
I don't think does it surprise me? No, it doesn't surprise me. That's the fact. It's just what it is.
Okay, so listen to me again. You said that Bob Durst was conservative with his money. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware of Bob Durst, other than Susan Berman, giving money to his friends? Are you aware of that?
I have no first-hand knowledge of him giving money to his friends.
And would you agree that the Bob Durst that you know in terms of how he is with money, that giving $50,000 to Susan Berman, that would be unusual to you and not what you would expect of your friend Bob Durst?
I don't know if it's unusual. I don't know who he gave money to.
So, Mr. Lewin, I want you to slide that lectern over a little bit. We put that lectern there for, so that no juror view would be blocked.
Are we good now, Your Honor?
We had to slide it over a little bit. Now I need you to slide, maybe step forward a little bit. And can you see the witness? Can everyone see the witness? Still? Okay. We adjusted the jurors' seats,
Right.
and so that's changed the geometry a little bit.
All right. I have a habit of moving. I will try to stand still. All right. I want to ask you for a moment, did you ever see Bob Durst exhibit any temper?
No.
Did you ever see him violent?
No.
Are you aware of a situation that happened with Bob Durst involving an individual named Peter Schwartz?
Yes.
You were actually there at the apartment that day, weren't you?
To the best of my recollection, I was there, yes.
So how can you be unaware of Bob Durst being violent when you were at an apartment where he kicked a man in the face with a boot?
I did not see him kick anybody with a boot.
Okay, Mr. Oliver, you said at the time you did not actually see it, but you were there when it happened and were aware of the allegation and situation, correct?
Correct.
And you saw Mr. Schwartz with his injury afterwards, correct?
I don't recall seeing or even knowing who Mr. Schwartz was.
So, Mr. Oliver, when you just said a moment ago...
He just, the answer was he didn't recall seeing or even knowing who Mr. Schwartz was. In that kind of volume, please. Go ahead.
So, forgetting about names for a moment, you were present in the apartment in 1981 when you were told that Bob Durst had kicked a man in the face, correct?
All I remember is something happened, but I really had no recollection of the facts, and except what I've been reading in the papers and what you've told me.
So when you said a moment ago that you did not know Bob Durst to be violent, you knew about this situation. Is that correct?
It didn't appear to me that, in my recollection, that it was violent, because we were there, it was a party, I forgot what we were doing, but the party went on. It was like not a big incident, because it wasn't like...
Were you aware, Mr. Oliver, that Mr. Schwartz had a broken orbital bone and had to go to the hospital?
I was not aware of that.
So you did not hear people talking about what had just happened when you were in that apartment?
No one talked about it, as I recall.
So your testimony is that Bob Durst kicked somebody in the face in an apartment while you were there, but that afterward nobody spoke about it and you don't remember the incident. Is that your testimony?
No, that's not his testimony. That's an improper summary of what he said.
Well, then he can deny it, Mr. DeGuerin. The witness can take care of himself. Please be seated.
Can you answer my question?
Can you repeat that again, please?
I can't hear you, Mr. Oliver. Please.
Can you repeat it again, please?
Repeat the question.
Certainly. Mr. Oliver, is it your testimony that Mr. Schwartz, I want you to assume the following hypothetical. There's been testimony that Mr. Schwartz was kicked in the face by Mr. Durst, something Mr. Durst has admitted to in 1981 in that apartment on the night that you were there. And is it your testimony that after that incident happened, nobody mentioned anything about it?
We didn't talk about it, as far as I can recall.
Okay. And your memory is you don't remember seeing Mr. Schwartz with his broken orbital bone.
I don't remember that at all.
And so when I asked you if Mr. Durst had ever been violent, you either forgot that incident or didn't think that was an incident of violence. Is that correct?
I don't recall it being a violent incident.
Let me ask you, when you first met Kathy Durst, I'm sorry, when you first met Bob Durst, was he already married to Kathy?
Yes,
Did you ever meet Kathy?
yes.
What was she like?
She's a lovely young lady.
At the time, were you aware of the status of their marriage?
No,
Did you meet Kathy at or near the time you met Bob in 1977?
I believe so.
And at that time, were you aware that Bob Durst was having affairs?
No,
In fact, you said during the interview that you had with myself and investigators in October of 2019 that you were unaware of any cheating by Bob Durst. You didn't know anything about any infidelity. Is that correct?
yes,
And is that still your testimony right now?
yes, he never discussed that with me.
Okay. Did Bob Durst ever talk to you about his marriage?
No, not really.
And have you previously said that you did not believe they had any marital problems because Bob Durst never mentioned anything about it?
I was not aware of the problems they were having.
Did you notice any change in their relationship from the time you met them in 1977 until Kathy disappeared in 1982?
To the best of my recollection, I didn't notice any changes.
I'm sorry,
So-
can you say that again?
To
Okay.
the best of my recollection, I did not notice any changes.
Again, Mr. Oliver, you start off talking and then you fade off, and no one can understand what you're saying.
Here, so I'm gonna give you my microphone, all right? This is the best microphone in the room, okay? The court reporter couldn't even hear
Can I
you
take this
before, and
off?
she's 69, can't take it off. I'm sorry.
You want mine?
No, I don't want yours.
How's that, gentlemen?
That's good.
I guess I should have done that in the first place.
It's my accent, I apologize.
Okay. Did you know at the time that Kathy disappeared that she and Bob were in discussions regarding a divorce?
I don't recall that.
Do you recall saying during your 2019 interview that you actually found out about it, but you're not sure how you heard about the information?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Do you recall during your 2019 interview saying, yes, you were aware that they were having issues, but you are not sure how it was you learned of that information?
Yes,
And is that a correct statement?
I would say so, yes.
Were you aware at any time while it was happening that Bob Durst was being violent with Kathy?
I have no recollection of any violence.
And you became aware subsequent, you're aware now, that Bob Durst was violent with his wife Kathy, correct?
I only know what you've told me.
Well, you saw the movie All Good Things, correct?
You know, I think I saw it, I can't remember.
So
Is that the,
with where what's wrong with me? Where Ryan Gosling, thank you, and Kirsten Dunst. Ryan Gosling plays Bob Durst. Kirsten Dunst plays Kathy. You saw that movie, Mr. Oliver, correct?
and I don't recall if I saw it. I know it exists, but I'm not sure if I watched it.
So you're saying they make a movie about one of your closest friends and his missing wife, and you're not sure if you saw the movie?
I don't recall watching it, okay?
Well, you do recall watching the Jinx, though, correct?
Yes,
And you agree that during the Jinx, your friend Bob Durst was very open about the fact that he was physically and emotionally abusing his wife, correct?
Maybe I should watch it. I really don't remember anything about the movie. I mean, the Jinx. I didn't particularly like it.
Clip number D0029, 10/30/19, page 52, line 22 to page 53, line 7.
Governor may be marked as 104 and 104A.
104, 104A.
You're aware that on the Jinx, Bob's talking about how he used to be violent with Kathy.
Can we stop?
That there's a scene, do you remember this scene?
I really put the Jinx out of my mind. I didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
Object, his view, whether he has one or not, of what the Jinx says is not relevant.
This is going to his credibility and his honesty about what he knew about the domestic violence relationship, and that goes to the credibility of the remainder of his testimony.
Well,
He's also being impeached by what he originally said during this interview.
Overruled.
You're aware that on the Jinx, Bob's talking about how he used to be violent with Kathy. That there's a scene, do you remember this scene?
I really put the Jinx out of my mind. I didn't like it at all.
I understand that.
So I don't remember that scene. I'll go watch it if you like it. I'll watch it again.
No, where I'm going with this, Doug, is, and I get it, what you're basically telling me is that you don't want to think about Bob being violent. You completely put that out of your mind because that's not the Bob you know. Right?
Does that refresh your recollection about having been aware of violence involving Bob and Kathy from the Jinx?
Yes, it refreshes my memory that there was violence in the movie, The Jinx.
And your response to that was you didn't want to think about it because Bob's your friend, correct?
No, I don't want to think about it.
For the reason I just said, because Bob is your friend, correct?
Yes.
I want to ask you, would you describe Kathy Durst as a person who flashed her money?
No, neither of them were flashy people.
In fact, you would agree that Kathy walked around more like a hippie than a debutante, is that correct?
I don't think she was a hippie. She was a nice lady.
10/30/19, clip D0027, page 46, lines 14 through 23.
105, 105A.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Isn't it fair to say that Kathy was, more of a hippie than she was a debutante?
Yes, she's more of a hippie, girl next door type of person.
And would you also agree that Kathy would not be the kind of person that would be out flashing money and fancy jewelry, the person you knew?
No, because the Durst and the whole family, they didn't need to flash it. They just their name told you what they were.
So, Mr. Oliver, the Kathy Durst you know, if it was suggested that Kathy Durst was out about town flashing her wealth, would that be inconsistent or consistent with the Kathy Durst you knew?
Yes, it would be inconsistent.
Did you ever visit the Dursts in their South Salem cottage?
Yes.
In fact, you were there a couple of different times before Kathy disappeared, is that right?
Yes, I refreshed my memory yesterday when I saw the document that you're referring to regarding the interview.
And in fact, you stayed in a downstairs guest room where you had to go downstairs to get to it, is that correct?
I don't recall it, but if that's what it said, yes.
And if you said that in 2001 to investigators, that would have been true, correct?
Correct.
I want to ask you about Susan Berman. Did you ever meet her?
Yes,
And how did you meet Susan?
through Bob.
If I were to ask you, what was Susan Berman like?
One word?
Sure.
Needy.
Needy, okay. Did you also describe her as a powerhouse?
No.
During your October 2019 interview, did you say Susan was a powerhouse who would take control of a room?
Did I say that?
So, well, let's say it this way. Do you agree that that is an accurate assessment of her?
If I said that, then that's what happened.
So, is that a proper assessment of her?
Yes, when she came into a room, she was the center of attraction.
And if I were to ask you, how close was the relationship between Bob Durst and Susan Berman?
And I think it was very close.
You agree it was extremely close, correct?
I'm not sure what extremely means.
Well, you've used that word. You used it during the 2019 interview, didn't you?
Well, then, okay, if I said that, then yes, extremely close.
So, am I correct, Mr. Oliver, that basically, as long as I ask you a question where I can tell you you've said this before, you'll agree to it, but if not, you'll just deny it?
Argumentative.
Overruled.
Can you repeat that again, please?
So, Mr. Oliver, I've noticed that the questions that I ask, you first say they're not true, you don't remember. Then I tell you, well, Mr. Oliver, you said this in a certain date. Then you'll say, well, if I said it, I guess it's true. So my question to you is, are you up there on the witness stand and have you taken a position that the only questions you're going to answer are the ones you've already answered?
No.
Okay. Would you agree that Susan was closer to Bob than you were?
Yes.
And would you agree that as far as you know, Bob was closer to Susan than any other person?
I don't know if she was the closest person. I mean,
Who would you say, Mr. Oliver, the people that you knew that were closer to Bob Durst and Susan?
I think Nick was as close.
So it would be Nick Chavin and Susan Berman were the two people closest to her, correct? I'm sorry, Nick Chavin and Susan Berman were the two people closest to
That
Bob.
would be my opinion, yes.
Was Susan the kind of person that you would, quote, never want to cross, unquote?
No, she wasn't. No. I mean, was she fearful?
Do you recall why you said during your 2019 interview that Susan is someone you would never want to cross? Do you know why you said that?
No, I don't remember why I said that.
I want you to assume for a moment that you said it.
Okay.
Any idea as you sit here why that might have come out of your mouth?
I don't know why I said that.
Let's talk about Kathy's disappearance for a moment. How did you find out that Kathy had disappeared?
I found out through the reading in the papers, the Post.
So you're saying that one of your close friends' wives disappears, and you find out about it by reading it in the newspaper?
Yes.
Did Bob Durst ever talk to you about it?
No.
Did that seem strange to you, Mr. Oliver?
I was a little surprised, but Bobby was always a very private person, and I think when someone disappears, people go through it in different ways, and that's the way he wanted to deal with it, was to be quiet about it, I guess.
Well, Mr. Oliver, do you have any experience with anybody else that you've known in your life whose wife suddenly disappears, never to be heard from again? Do you have any experience with that?
With someone's wife or just someone?
No. Do you have experience with
Yes.
someone wife disappearing, never to be
not,
heard from
not
again?
a wife. I have experience with someone, a family member who disappeared.
Motion to strike, the answer is non-responsive.
Okay, stricken.
Listen to my question again. Do you have experience with anybody that you know where their wife suddenly disappears, never to be heard from again?
No.
So when Bob Durst's wife disappeared and you found out about it from the newspaper, I assume you asked him about it, correct?
I didn't have a chance to ask him about it at that time.
What do you mean?
Well, Bob had, we weren't talking And then I found out about it from the paper, and I tried to reach Bob. He didn't return my calls.
Well, isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that you spoke to Bob Durst several times that week after Kathy disappeared?
You showed me the information that calls were made.
And you agreed, though, that was your phone number?
That was my phone number.
And the time of the calls indicated to you that you actually had conversations with Mr. Durst, correct?
I was thinking about it last night after you told me about it, and I'm not sure if I actually spoke to him.
Isn't it true, Mr.
I must have spoke to him at least once. I spoke to him a few times that week, yes.
And did he ever mention to you, hey, you know what, my wife's missing?
No.
Do you think that would have been something that you would have expected him to mention?
I accepted Bobby for what he was, and if he didn't want to talk to me about something that was upsetting, and I don't think it's so wrong that he didn't talk to me.
So I want to back up. At the time, Mr. Oliver, you now know that Bob Durst was aware that his wife was missing, correct? And you were speaking to him, and he did not mention anything about it. Is that correct?
I didn't hear the whole conversation, the whole question.
Okay. You are now aware today that during the week after Kathy disappeared, that Bob Durst is now aware that his wife is allegedly missing, and he doesn't say anything to you, correct?
Correct.
And at that time, you didn't know anything about it either, correct?
Correct. Until it came out in the Post. I'm not sure what day that was.
So how could you have been trying to protect his privacy about something you didn't know had happened?
I wasn't trying to protect his privacy.
So let me ask you again.
I was just respecting, in retrospect, I'm respecting the fact that he didn't want to talk about it.
Well, don't you find it, Mr. Oliver, completely incomprehensible that your close friend's wife has allegedly disappeared and he never mentions it to you?
I think that's what he wanted, you know? He didn't want to talk about it.
Do you know why he didn't want to talk about it?
No.
Did you ever ask him?
No, I never asked him why he didn't want to talk about it.
And you've been very clear that at the time, you did not understand why Bob Durst did not mention it to you, correct? You've thought back and said, boy, I don't understand why he didn't tell me, correct?
Yes, I didn't understand why.
Do you understand why now?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because I think I've seen other people who have lost loved ones to missing, and I've seen they seem to want a lot of privacy in these matters.
But do you know what the 5 stages of grief are, Mr. Oliver? You ever heard of that?
No, what are they?
You've never heard of the 5 stages of grief?
I don't recall what they are, I'm sorry.
Denial, questioning, anger, bargaining, acceptance. Mm-hmm. It's a level where people over time with grief, it takes them a certain amount of time and they go through different stages. So my question to you would be, you're talking to Bob Durst the week his wife disappeared. Don't you think he would be trying to figure out where she was rather than wanting privacy about what happened to his wife, something he supposedly doesn't know anything about? Does that make sense to you?
Well, it explained to me that they were, that the family was spending money with detectives and they were looking. Later on I found out about that.
You didn't find out about that from Bob Durst, though, did you?
No, we didn't discuss it.
Did Bob Durst ever ask you for help?
No.
So, did you ever bring up to him, hey, what do you think ever happened to Kathy?
Once.
And can you tell me about that conversation?
I can't recall the conversation, but I remember he's told me we're doing everything we can. It's very upsetting. We're getting lots of sightings all over the world. And I just, he indicated to me he'd just rather not discuss it.
clip D0025, 103019, page 35, line 18 to page 36, line 1.
106? 106, 106A?
D25.
When you first heard she disappeared, what did you think?
You get this shirt? I didn't know what happened to her.
Well, I mean, I understand you didn't know, but I would assume that, did you ever ask Bob what he thought?
Okay. He didn't want to talk about it.
When you say he didn't want to talk about it, how do you know that Bob didn't want to talk about it?
We never talked about it. Yeah, believe me, I have to. I'm fortunate enough that I'm sure I asked.
So, Mr. Oliver, you asked Bob what happened to Kathy, and he made it clear to you that was not a subject he wanted to talk about, correct?
Yes.
Did you ever ask him, Mr. Oliver, if he was involved in her disappearance?
No.
That was intentional, wasn't it?
What do you mean?
You didn't want to know, correct?
No, no, of course I wanted to know what happened to her.
So you asked one time what happened to her in a forceful way and then gave up and never asked again.
We never discussed it again.
You never discussed it again because you never asked about it and he never volunteered, correct?
Yes, correct.
I asked you about this issue, about whether or not you had talked to Bob at all about Kathy's disappearance during the October 30th, 2019 interview. Do you recall that?
No, I don't recall that.
10/30/19, D0026, page 38, line 28 to page 40, line 26.
107, 107, 107A.
So it's fair to say, Doug, that although you know Bob didn't want to talk about Kathy's disappearance, you do not know why. Is that fair?
Do I know why you don't want to talk about it?
Well, so,
That's a double negative.
no. You just told me, yeah, Bob didn't want to talk about Kathy. So I asked you the question, Doug, do you know why Bob didn't want to talk about Kathy?
Well, how am I going to know why?
So I assume the answer would be no. I do not know why Bob didn't want to talk about Kathy. Correct?
I'm not sure what you're trying to do. I apologize.
Well, no, Doug, listen. I'm a big...
Okay?
So listen, I'm gonna explain.
The woman disappeared.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about it. Okay. We had a really nice, and then we went on. I guess we totally forgot about it. Maybe it was a bad friend. I should have asked more. But, well, we had several years where we had a lot of fun. We did all kinds of things. And, you make me feel like I was a bad friend.
No, listen, Doug, this is not about you or what kind of friend you were.
It's certainly about me.
No, this is about this murder case that I'm handling. So hold on a minute. So you said a moment ago, these weren't my words. You said Bob didn't want to talk about Kathy, so you didn't bring it up. So I'm just trying to make sure that you are
All
in.
I can say is I didn't feel Bob wanted to talk to me, so we didn't talk about it. And what was I supposed to do?
No, Doug, I understand that. So all that I'm saying is that because Bob didn't talk about it, all that you can say is, I know Bob didn't want to talk about it, but I'm not inside his head. I can't tell you why he didn't want to talk about it. I can just tell you he didn't want to talk about it. And it seems like you don't want to answer that question. That's a pretty easy question. So that's either a yes or no.
What is the question?
The question is, do
Let me
you...
write this down.
Okay, you ready?
The question is,
Do you know why Bob did not want to talk about Kathy's disappearance?
do you know why
did not want to talk about Kathy's disappearance.
Kathy's appearance. No.
Mr. Oliver, you seriously had to write down that question to answer it?
I did.
Isn't it true, Mr. Oliver, that that was merely a means of delaying answering a question that you didn't want to answer?
No, I answered the question.
Listen to my question again, Mr. Oliver. I asked you a simple question. You didn't answer it. Then you said you needed to write approximately an 8-word question down, which you then wrote. You can hear you writing on it. Does that make sense to you that you would need to write down that question to be able to answer it?
It made sense to me.
You didn't want to answer the question, though, did you?
I didn't want to answer any of your questions.
Well, Mr. Oliver, you would agree that there were some of my questions that you were much more reluctant to answer than others. Is that correct?
No, I didn't want to answer any of them.
Your phone number back at that time in New York, what was it?
212-288-7318.
And you looked at the phone records. I showed them to you. And you know that you had calls with Bob Durst the week after Kathy disappeared, correct?
You showed me those records?
Yes?
Just refresh my memory. Can you tell me when you showed them to me?
You want to see them right now?
Yes, please.
Sure. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
These are, this is a part of People's 69. We are on page 3 of 69. You go take a look.
All right.
Let me know when you're done.
I'll finish.
Okay? You agree there were calls from Bob Durst to you that week. Is that correct? Kathy disappeared.
There were calls to my home number, yes.
And Mr. Oliver, you've already said that at that time, that if there was, for instance, a 6-minute call, it would have been you that would have spoken to Mr. Durst, correct?
The best of my recollection, probably I spoke to Mr. Durst.
Do you recall what subjects you talked about with Bob Durst in the immediate aftermath of his wife's disappearance?
You mean in those calls?
Yes.
I don't recall the calls at all.
Do you recall talking to Mr. Durst on January 31st at 7 p.m.?
No.
Approach. I'm going to show you the same exhibit I showed you before.
I thought that was only this February. Where's it? Where's the one on December 31st?
No.
Isn't this 203, February 3rd?
No.
No, what?
Hold on.
Is this the date, sir?
The date is on the...
131 is January 31st, correct?
Correct. The date-
203 is February 3rd, right?
That's
Correct?
correct, that's
Okay.
correct.
So, so you asked me on the 31st?
Correct. Hold on a second. You got your fingers on top.
Wait, hold on for what?
May I look at the document, Mr. Oliver? One moment. Hold on a second. Here, just put it. Hold on a second.
We're going to break.
I'm sorry.
We're going to break. Pardon me? Not happening, sorry.
We'll come back to this, Mr. Oliver. Hold on one moment.
You got it. I'm giving you a minute and a half.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you agree that after Kathy Durst disappeared, that other than that one conversation that you've now discussed where your statement was played, that you never had another conversation with Mr. Durst about Kathy's disappearance.
Yes.
And that's, even though it's 1982, we're now in 2021, in 39 years, one conversation.
Well, of those 39 years, 29 of those, I really have not had any contact with Bob, except for the last 4 years.
In the last 4 years, have you had a conversation with Mr. Durst about what happened to his wife, Kathy?
No, I don't believe we have.
Why?
Well, but he's in jail.
You've spoken to him, is that correct?
When I spoke to Bob in jail, I didn't really want to talk about what he was here for, and I thought it'd be nice to have discussions about some pleasant things.
Also, his lawyers told you not to talk to Bob about anything related to the case, correct?
Yes, they said that it's not good to talk because everything's taped.
Objections? Yeah.
That's going to be part of what I was going to talk about later.
Okay, I'm gonna strike that answer, disregard it, ladies and gentlemen. And it is 4:30. Ladies and gentlemen, do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. Mr. Oliver, you are ordered to be in this courtroom tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Do not discuss your testimony with any other witness. See you tomorrow at 9 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. There was an objection. Our jurors are gone. There's an objection to the last question. I don't know if it's appropriate or not, so you may re-ask it tomorrow if it is, but we'll talk about it. Yes, Mr. Chesnoff?
First of all, Your Honor, Mr. Lewin elicited answers about Mr. Durst's custodial status in this case.
No, that was volunteer.
No,
That was
he
volunteer.
asked him on his he used the word jail calls, Your Honor. That was Mr. Lewin's words.
That's right. Before he volunteered it, there was a
Three references.
These have been, as the court is aware and the court instructed, I believe at the beginning of this trial, there's numerous pieces of evidence that have come in involving Mr. Durst's jail calls, which have been referred to in opening, et cetera. The second issue, Your Honor.
Excuse me, Your Honor, it's not unavoidable. They can be called calls. It's a direct reference to his custodial status, which we object to, Your Honor.
Okay.
And believe that it should not happen again, and I will, for the record, ask you to mistry the case because it's totally improper for the prosecution to inform the jury that a man on trial for murder is in custody. That's
okay. Well, so your motion for a mistrial is denied. It's a brief reference that does not would not conceivably prejudice the jury. I'll instruct them, if you like, that they're not to take his custody status into account. That's appropriate.
Your Honor, with respect to the questions about the attorneys,
Yes.
as an offer of proof, and it's going to come up on the jail calls, Mr. Oliver is telling, when Bob is starting to say things on the jail calls, the witness says, your attorneys told me that I'm not supposed to have you say anything, you're not supposed to discuss anything. So it's relevant for two issues. Number one, Mr. Oliver is completely cooperating with Bob Durst's lawyers. Number two, he is deliberately, when he's talking to Bob Durst, trying to make sure that Bob Durst is not saying anything, which goes against the very first thing that he said in this case when he took the stand, which is that he is here to provide information, that he is unbiased.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true, Mr. Lewin, and this is why, because he now stands accused of a crime, and it's appropriate for him not to discuss it. It's appropriate for his lawyers not to talk to him. Tell him not to discuss it. There's nothing wrong with that. The jury shouldn't draw.
No, Your Honor, not Bob Durst. Your Honor, let's be clear. Bob Durst is not saying this. Doug Oliver is saying.
Doesn't matter who says it. You're eliciting the lawyer's advice to the client.
No, Your Honor. No, it's not advice to the client. It's the advice to Doug Oliver, and it goes to Mr. Oliver's bias because Doug Oliver is talking to the defense all day.
All right. So that's very important. That is advice to Doug Oliver,
Yes.
not to the defendant.
But,
Yes.
Your Honor, it's a reflection on the advice that has been given to Mr. Durst by his lawyers not to discuss anything, which is his right. And once again, the prosecution is basically commenting on Mr. Durst's silence. This whole line of questioning about why Bob Durst isn't discussing his missing wife, he's represented by counsel back then too, Your Honor.
It's the opposite, Your Honor. Doug Oliver is the one telling Bob Durst, hey, don't say anything. Your lawyers told me you shouldn't be discussing it. There is no attorney-client relationship between Doug Oliver and Bob Durst's lawyers.
So I think it's different to the extent that wouldn't require a mistrial. It's it could reflect on credibility, but that's always there's always some relevant purpose to something that bears upon attorney-client relations. I don't think this interferes with that, but I think you have to be careful, Mr. Lewin.
Your Honor, it's definitely more prejudicial than probative. If Mr. Lewin's purpose is to undermine the credibility of this witness, I think that one could say that he's had plenty of ammunition. To have to comment on Mr. Durst's right to remain silent, it is more prejudicial than probative.
It is not commenting.
That is a good argument. That's a better argument.
Your Honor, I'm not going to comment at all. This has nothing to do with Mr. Durst's right to remain silent.
He won't stop.
It is not Mr. Durst who's saying things, it is Mr. Oliver.
Right, so here's the thing. I don't think there's a Sixth Amendment or Fifth Amendment problem here,
Okay.
but I do think this is more prejudicial than probative, so I did strike the answer.
Okay.
I told the jury to disregard it. I'm instructing not to ask questions of that nature. You have destroyed the credibility of this witness already, but that's fine.
Your Honor, what does that do? I have a jail call that I'm going to be playing, and on the jail call, you hear Mr. Oliver say this. Now, that's coming from Mr. Oliver's voice. I would assume that is an offer of proof of what is going to be
Well,
played.
show me the text, and perhaps it can be edited.
Do you want me to show it to you now?
Well, it's
Your Honor, he's
4:35,
already-
and I want the everyone else to go home.
Oh, Your Honor, okay.
I'll look at it, but
Okay.
yeah. we'll take
You
it
already
tomorrow.
established it, the man, he already established this, now he wants to do it again. That's why I got upset, because he established
No,
it.
I'm going to rule on your objection, Mr. Chestnut,
Thank you.
so it's fine. Okay, anything else before the hammer comes on the bell?
Please bring it down.
Department 81 in absentia. Department 1 is adjourned. There we go.